Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Burton, and today I'm going to be talking about the Saskatoon serviceberry. Um, the scientific name is Malancier or Malancier alnifolia, and it's in the Rosaceae family. So first, we'll talk a little bit about the habitat and history of the Saskatoon serviceberry. So um, the serviceberry can grow in like rocky to kind of dry habitats all the way to more a little bit like wet and acidic soil. So it has a pretty wide range and it grows in the region that's highlighted in green on the map on the screen. So on the right, you can see an example of the serviceberry. I don't know if you remember from class, but it can be identified by the serrations on the distal end of the leaf. Also, the fruit to me looks like rose hips. On the left, you can see an example of a traditional food that serviceberry was included in that kind of hints towards people knowing the value and use of serviceberry. And so the native peoples used to have this food called pemmican, which is made of tallow, which is like fat or lard from either elk, deer, or bison. And they also have the dried meat, and they'll mix it with dried berries, which would be like cranberries, chokecherries, and serviceberries were like three of the common included berries. And they're kind of mashed together to make what to me reminds me of like a kind bar. So it's kind of like the OG kind bar. And I know natives in Montana also use serviceberry to modulate like blood glucose levels for the management of obesity and diabetes. And so even serviceberry is being looked into now for use in those. So what I'm going to be talking about today and how it relates to my research is the Saskatoon serviceberry as a nutraceutical for the treatment of neurodegenerative disease. So we know what the Saskatoon serviceberry is. We can talk about nutraceutical. What is a nutraceutical? So nutraceutical is a food product that is not just valuable for nutritional uses, it's also medicinal. So it's using your food as medicine. And what are we interested in treating? I am personally interested in using food as medicine to treat neurodegenerative disease. This is important to me because my grandfather had Alzheimer's, and also I'm just very interested in aging and degradation of your brain as you age. So I'll kind of go on to the next slide. We can talk about how this can be done. So what is in the serviceberries that makes them so valuable? Many things, I'd say, but in this instance, we're going to focus on anthocyanins. So anthocyanins are actually the pigment that makes berries have their beautiful color, even makes like red potatoes have their color in red cabbage, blackberries, grapes, blueberries, and the color can be attributed to the chemical structure of the anthocyanins. And as that chemical structure is altered by pH, the color changes. So you can kind of manipulate it. Actually, you can like extract this dye out of serviceberries, and you can kind of crush them up, dry them out. You'll have this red powder. If you add baking soda, it'll become more basic. If you add, it'll go more green. And if you add but vinegar, it'll get more acidic and it'll go more towards the red end of the spectrum. And so it's kind of interesting. You can use these as a natural dye, but that's not the most interesting part. The most interesting part is using them as antioxidants, anti-inflammatory, diabetes, and anti-cancer. So how is that possible? So what actually changes their color with pH also has to do with this ability to heal. So this is the hydrogen atom. So anthocyanins have an extra hydrogen atom that they can use as a donor, and they can donate this and use that to neutralize these free radicals of oxygen. So what are oxygen free radicals? Why do we need to use these fruit pigments to neutralize them? Well, we can talk a little bit about what reactive oxygen species are, and then we'll talk about what they do in the body. So a reactive oxygen species, they're pretty much cellular products that are created during like our cellular reactions. It's just a part of the redox homeostasis that goes on in our cells. Why are they called reactive oxygen species? Well, they're called reactive oxygen species because the oxygen molecule in the outer valence electron has some instability. And in these reactive oxygen species, they have a unpaired electron, which is just begging for attention and wants to be paired with. That's why anthocyanin can donate their hydrogen atom and bond with that unpaired electron, therefore neutralizing the reactive oxygen species. So it's kind of interesting. You have these volatile things running around in your system. Why are they in there? Why do you have them in your body? Well, they're very important for cellular differentiation and growth while you're developing as an embryo. So it's important for you to have some of these reactive oxygen species because they act as cellular communication modes. So it's kind of like messages your cells are sending. It helps them communicate and it helps the whole community of cells be in concert. But if you have some factors that are kind of making there be too much of a buildup of these reactive oxygen species. So you could have like chronic stress or actual injury from trauma. You could have viral disease, depression, bad diet. All these things can kind of injure your cells. And when your cells are injured, they produce this reactive oxygen species as a defense mechanism. And it's good in the short term for wound healing and self-proliferation and growth, but in the long term, it can be really damaging. It's like a chronic inflammation. And when you have all this buildup of these volatile molecules, then it can start causing some problems. So on the left, you can see a normal motor neuron. So this is a healthy person without ALS, without any kind of neurodegenerative disease, so they have a perfect, beautiful, shiny nail. And on the right, you can see someone with ALS and how their brain cells don't exactly look the same. They are not well connected to the muscle, so they can't communicate with the muscle very well. And therefore, the people with this disease, they have a really hard time moving and they have atrophy of their muscles. And so you can see on the diagram on the right, number 2 at the bottom of the list is oxidative stress. So that's what we're going to be looking at, is how oxidative stress can promote disease. So I have the analogy of a rusted nail, an oxidized rusted nail versus a healthy cell on the left, which is this beautiful shiny nail. We can think of antioxidants kind of like a zinc coating that can protect that nail from rusting or oxidizing. And here we have a little bit more information tying this into my research. So I specifically research a compound called beta-methyl-L-alanine, which is a toxin produced by blue-green algae, which is in pretty much every waterway around the world. And in high doses, it can basically just blow the speaker of your neurons, cause initial damage, trauma, leads to the buildup of ROS, these reactive oxygen species. In a low dose, it gets misintegrated as a nucleic acid and can cause protein misfolding, which also leads to, neurological trauma and the buildup of ROS, as seen in this diagram on the right. So you can see how this toxin comes into the human body and creates a buildup of these reactive radical molecules. So that's obviously not good. So can kind of go to the next slide, look at this in a little bit more detail. So in a perfect world, we have a little bit of reactive oxygen species driving our growth, our differentiation, our healthy senescence, our aging, and that's kind of represented by the green in this diagram with this piece of art on the left and a healthy neuron, a healthy brain state. And you can see that after chronic inflammation, stress, multiple stressors, ranging from disease, like we talked about earlier, like viral to like physical trauma, head injury, these things can cause a buildup of the ROS, and that can lead to even more disease. So that buildup of these reactive oxygen species from one trauma can lead to more traumas like cardiovascular disease, protein misfolding, chronic inflammation, and damage to the DNA. So we know that life happens, these horrible things build up inside of us, and they eventually kind of get us all. How could we prevent that from happening, or maybe even just prolong this buildup process so that it kind of builds up later? I mean, maybe we can live a little bit longer in that little bit of grace period before it builds up and finally tears us down. We can interrupt that process with nutraceuticals, and by supplementing compounds that can actually kind of neutralize these volatile elements within us. And so that's kind of illustrated by this little green image of the serviceberry interrupting the red arrow, which represents the progression of disease. Here we have an overview. You can see on the left of this diagram, there are multiple factors that can contribute to the buildup of reactive oxygen species in your body, represented by the red gear in the middle. So after you've built this up, that can lead to more problems, which are represented by the purple symbols on the right side of the image. So you can see how multiple different things ranging from bad diet to chronic infections, being exposed to toxins in the environment like BMAA, shown in yellow, can lead to a buildup of reactive oxygen, which can then be, this is the special part, fixed or neutralized by these anthocyanins and other different antioxidants in order to prevent this neurodegenerative disease and other different things, including depression and immunosenescence, autoimmune disease, cancer. So I just hope that maybe y'all learned a little bit about how our environment can really tear us down, poison our system, and through these compounds found in algae and other stuff, which has been exacerbated by increased temperatures and bad water management, but also how we can be rescued by the plants that are naturally occurring all around us, especially in the plains and in the region of the country that we live in. There are a lot of antioxidant containing plants. So I think it's just important to keep in mind that your environment can tear you down or build you up, and you have to be very mindful in your engagement with your surroundings. So I hope that y'all have a good holiday break, and thank you for listening to my presentation.